Good morning.
How is everyone?
Doing well, Governor Crouch. Thank you so much.
Good.
I think we're have most of the people joining. We have our first speaker, so that's always helpful. Maybe a couple more are joining in now. And while we're waiting for folks to join, just a couple logistics. Again, you probably all are Zoom experts at this point, whether you want to be or not. But we'll have generally keep your microphones on mute when you're not speaking. We're monitoring the chat, Zoom chat group function. So if you have questions, feel free to put those into the chat box, and we will address those probably at the end of each panel as we're going forward. So if you have any questions about that, let us know, and Joseph on our staff is going to be monitoring that and reading those at the end after each section. So let's see, I think that's the sort of logistics of the meeting. And again, thank you all for being here. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I think really with that, Governor Crouch, over to you.
Well, thank you, Charles. And Joseph, I believe that you will review the roll call with us. So if you can go ahead and do the roll call, we'll make sure we have a quorum.
Okay. I will begin with the chair, Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch, Charles Dunlap, and I. And then based upon who we have in the meeting thus far, we have Dr. Lemuel Watson, Representative Tanya Pfaff, Representative Tony Cook, Honorable Loretta Rush, Amy Dudas, Scott Barnhart, Janet Chandler, Dr. Laura Hammack, Dr. Elizabeth Osborne, Kevin Brenniger, Dr. Eva Zeigmunt, and I can check the participants to see if any new people have shown up. J.D. Ford, and there is a phone number who could be another member, but those are all of the members of the task force that we have for now.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. So I do see that we have a quorum present, and I call this meeting of the Civic Education Task Force to order. And it's wonderful that today's technology allows us to continue our work, including expanding civic education across the state of Indiana. Our next meeting will be held in August. We're hoping to have a physical meeting there, but we will keep you posted. As you all know, the task force was originally established by a recommendation in the 2019 Civic Health Index. The recommendation states, to continue to promote civic education engagement, we propose convening a civic education task force to study methods of instruction, programs, and educational outcomes to improve civic education opportunities for all ages and prepare specific policy recommendations to improve civic education opportunities and programs in Indiana. And as you all can see, it is a pretty broad statement that allows us the opportunity to address multiple issues surrounding civic engagement. And so on that note, it's my pleasure to introduce Chuck Dunlap, the Executive Director of the Indiana Bauer Foundation. And Chuck, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just have a couple opening words, and then we'll get started. We have a busy agenda, as you can see, but thank you again for all joining us this morning. We do have a packed agenda. We look forward to hearing from experts on various aspects of civic education from around Indiana and the country. And the theme for today's meeting is innovation in civic education. And there are many innovative and creative ideas and initiatives in the field of civic education, and today's speakers will represent many of those. Given the limited time for our meeting today, we included links to a lot of the resources to help you prepare for some of the topics, which we hope you had a chance to look at. And just as a reminder, again, the materials and a recording of this meeting will be available in the Dropbox folder for your future reference as well. Also, I wanted to note that because of time, limited time, we're only able to focus on a few examples of some of the innovative civic education programs today. There are many other creative and innovative programs, including several here in Indiana, and we hope to spotlight those in the future at future meetings as well as in the resource materials. And one last item I'd like to take a moment to address, and I believe, I don't know if she's joined us yet, but we have a special guest this morning who will be joining us if she hasn't already. Many of you knew Judge Larry McKinney from the United States District Court for the Southern District of Indiana, who was a passionate advocate for civic education. Judge McKinney sadly passed away several years ago, much too early. However, his legacy and passion for civic education live on, and Judge McKinney's granddaughter, Helen McKinney, who's a high school student and she is currently pursuing her Girl Scout Gold Award, is focusing her efforts on increasing civic education opportunities for Hoosier high school students as her culminating project. So Helen is joining us today to listen to our speakers and help advance her goal of improving civic education. So if you're here already, welcome Helen, and if you're not, she soon will be. And thank you again for carrying on your grandfather's legacy and passion for civic education. So thank you, Governor Crouch. With that, I turn it back over to you to introduce our first panel.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome, Helen. It is wonderful to have young people engaged and actually on this call with us, so thank you. And on that note, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ted Mcconnell. He will be providing us with some insight on national civic education and engagement. Ted serves as a senior policy advisor to the Civics Now Coalition, which is committed to improving the quality and the quantity of civic learning in our nation's schools. Ted has been involved in the political, governmental, and nonprofit sectors for over 40 years and dedicated most of his work to this very topic. A quick note, if you are on the computer for this meeting, please write your questions for Ted in the chat box. Joseph will be the moderator afterwards. If you're on the phone for this meeting, we will give you notice of when you can ask your questions at the end of Ted's presentation. And with that, Ted, I hand the microphone over to you. Thank you for being here with us.
Good morning, and thank you, Governor Crouch. It is a joy to be with you all once again. Congratulations to the Indiana Bar Foundation and to each of you wonderful task force members for the work you're engaged on, and I know it will lead to better civic learning outcomes in the great state of Indiana. Today's theme of today's meeting is innovation in civic education. As we talked about at the last meeting, over the past few decades, while time and resources for civic education have been in decline in most schools across the country, we've also experienced a revolution of innovation in how to effectively teach civics and government. And the two programs we'll be focusing on later today certainly exemplify that innovation. They're two of the very best programs in the country. You know, this movement to restore the essential civic mission of schools got kicked off back in 2000, and a great Hoosier, my friend, former Congressman Lee Hamilton, was a big part of that. When the Civic Mission of Schools report was originally released, a report written by the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, now at Tufts University. In that report, which convened the best minds in civic education, it was determined that there were 6 proven practices that research showed were most effective in providing civic knowledge, civic skills, impacting civic behaviors, and civic dispositions. In 2017, at the launch of our new Civics Now Coalition, the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, or civicyouth.org at their website, updated the CMS report and added 4 more promising practices to the original 6. So I'm going to take a few minutes and run you through what these 10 practices are that every school should be employing in Indiana and across the country. And then we'll have examples from, again, 2 great programs that showcase this innovation. First, it all begins with effective student-centered classroom instruction. Students must provide robust, instruction in civics and government, history, both American and world, economics, geography, law, and democracy. Formal instruction in these subjects increases civic knowledge and increases young people's tendency to engage in civic and political activities over the long term. However, schools should avoid teaching only rote, dry facts about dry procedures. The programs you're about to see truly make civic learning come alive for students. We've got to get away from the dry, dusty textbooks of the past. But time must be allowed for formal classroom instruction. Second proven practice, discussion of current events and controversial issues. And oh my goodness gracious, is that ever spot right on today. Schools should incorporate discussion of current, local, national, and international issues and events into the classroom, particularly those that young people view as important to their lives. When students have an opportunity to discuss current issues in a classroom setting, they tend to have greater interest in civic life and politics, as well as improved critical thinking and communication skills, and a willingness to listen to the point of view of others. This is vitally important. Students must have the opportunity of discussing current events. Third, service learning. Schools should design and implement programs that provide students with the opportunity to apply what they've learned through performing community service that's linked to the formal curriculum and classroom instruction. And no, I'm not talking about going out and just picking up trash on the highway. That doesn't cut it, not unless it's linked to formal curriculum on the consequences of pollution. Here are a couple of great ideas and showing the integrative, interdisciplinary nature of civic learning. I've seen schools across the country where students go out and help the local water department by determining water quality. The students learn a little science, they learn a little civics, they perform a little community service. The varieties and possibilities are endless, but it's a great way to connect students to their community. Fourth, extracurricular activities. Schools should offer opportunities for young people to get involved in their schools or communities outside of the formal classroom. Studies show that students who participate in extracurricular activities in school remain more civically engaged than those who do not, even decades later. Fifth, school governance. Schools should encourage meaningful student participation in school governance, giving students more opportunities to participate in the management of their classroom, and schools that way schools help build student civic skills and attitudes. In other words, student council needs to be about more than picking prom colors. They should truly represent students' best interest to school management, and school management should listen to the concern of students. 6, simulations of small d democratic processes. Schools should encourage students to participate in simulations of small d democratic processes and procedures. Evidence shows that simulations of voting, trials, legislative processes, and deliberation, and small d democracy leads to heightened civic political knowledge and interest. And we're going to have an example of the largest simulation of democratic processes in the country, iCivics, here in a minute, and another great program, the We the People program from the Center for Civic Education, which truly engages students. Now, those are the 6 original proven practices. Here are the 4 relatively new practices that research shows must be employed in school and must be used to help students develop civic skills and dispositions. First, media and digital literacy. The digital landscape changes every year. We've seen attempts by foreign actors to influence our democratic processes here. Most recently, attempts by foreign actors to undermine respect for the rule of law and independence of our judiciary. It is vitally important that students are equipped with how to spot what's real versus what's not real in the internet. The Democracy Ready New York Coalition, a coalition similar to Indiana's, just issued, and we'll make sure through Joseph and Chuck, you each can have a copy of it, of standards for effective media and digital literacy. We urge you to take a look at it. Next, social and emotional learning. To be successful in life and contribute to society, students must learn to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. Students with better social emotional skills are likely to be more ethical and effective citizens, and experiences with civic learning can boost SEL outcomes. In some places, this is called character education. It is vitally important. Civics projects. Sometimes it's called Action Civics. Sometimes it's called Civics Laboratories. You couldn't graduate a chemistry class without doing some laboratory work. The same opportunity should be afforded civic students. The opportunity to take democracy out for a test drive by developing a civic project of interest to them. And finally, school climate reform. School suspension and arrests are known to depress young people's voting and volunteering rates for decades to come. Racial disparities and how often suspension and arrest are used for the same infractions have been well documented, including by civically engaged youth who are challenging the school to prison pipeline. Restorative justice and other alternative approaches show promise for enhancing schools' civic outcomes. So there are the 10 practices we recommend from the Civics Now Coalition and the Civic Mission of Schools report that every single school in the country should employ. And with that, I'm going to give you a few minutes back, Governor, because these two presentations that are coming up are so exciting. These are what we need to hear from. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Ted. And for our task force members who may not be aware, Ted is recuperating from COVID-19. So we are thrilled and we are grateful that you are on the mend and able to share your knowledge and your expertise with us, Ted. So thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Folks, wear a mask. It's important.
That's absolutely right. Thank you, Ted. And with that, Joseph, are there any questions in the chat box?
Not at this time.
Are there any questions from members on the phone? With that, Ted, I think that we will move on to Sonia Matthews. And Sonia is a program officer for the Democracy Program at the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, where she oversees the Youth Civic Engagement Strategy and manages the Democracy Schools Initiative to strengthen the state's civic education system. She spent almost 10 years as a social studies teacher in Chicago, Illinois, prior to joining the foundation. If you are on the computer, again, please write your questions in the chat box. And if you are on the phone, we will take your questions at the end of the presentation. Welcome, Sonia. We are absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today, and thank you. And also, Sonia, if you can introduce your panel as you present, that would be helpful. You'll know when to do that, so thank you.
I think, Sonia, you might be on mute.
All right. Can everyone, good morning, everyone. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. And I'm really thrilled to be here and share, the work of our colleagues. And the most of our time today will actually be spent from hearing from teachers and a student that actually attends a democracy school, but really excited for the opportunity and hope to collaborate with you all. And so I'll start out just giving a brief overview and really building on a lot of what Ted just shared is coming from the Civics Now platform, but then most of our time we'll be actually in discussion with our panelists. But so the Democracy Schools Initiative was really started, as Ted mentioned, in really trying to restore that civic purpose of schools. And so we really believed that Illinois high school students deserved these opportunities to really learn and practice civic engagement. And so an organization was formed here, the Illinois Civic Mission Coalition, that then created this process to really affirm high schools' commitments to civic learning by having them seek recognition as a democracy school. And so the actual definition of a school, the democracy school, is that it's a high school that's really recognized for really consciously promoting civic learning and engagement for all students by all teachers. And I think a big idea here, and that, the panelists will really be able to speak to this as well, is that this is something that goes beyond social studies, and that it's really something that, every educator it's part of their responsibility to think about the skills and dispositions and then civic knowledge that we want our young people to have. And that, these schools really prioritize an intentional focus on participatory citizenship and placing an emphasis on how students are understanding the fundamental ideals and principles of our society and how that might relate to current problems, opportunities, and controversies. The research and positive effects of civic learning have really shown that this promotes civic equality. It's building 21st century competencies. It improves school climate and reduces high school dropout rates. And so there's kind of this vested interest in seeing this work really expand. And this program started in Illinois in 2006. Since then, we've had 74 high schools throughout the state that have been recognized as democracy schools. And then we have 69 active schools in the Democracy Schools Network, which I'll talk about shortly. And that, the elements of democracy schools really build on kind of that framework that Ted shared, where we have these civic learning experiences, but then we're also looking at elements of organizational culture that must be in place to encourage and sustain a school-wide commitment to civic learning. And one of the unique places that we've tried to really adapt our model is by having it build upon a lived civics framework. So this was some research that came out a few years ago by Kathy Cohen, who's a University of Chicago professor, Joe Kahn, who works at the Civic Engagement Research Group, and then Jessica Marshall, who was the Director of Social Science and Civic Engagement in Chicago Public Schools. But this framework was one that was really created to center race, identity, and the lived experiences of young people as core elements of civic education efforts. I think we'd sent our democracy school indicators as kind of pre-reading, and I think there's ways that you see some language that's really thinking about students' identity as it connects to this work. And then the last piece around democracy schools is that we really think about civics across the curriculum and how that is promoting the role that every teacher can play in developing good citizens. And so this visual here really kind of gives you a snapshot of this model where we break down both the learning experiences and then the organizational culture. I think the differences comparing to kind of what Ted shared, the learning experiences, I think there's a lot of similarities. Organizational culture, I think he mentioned school climate, but I think some areas that we also focus on are student voice, vision and leadership, the teacher hiring, assessment, and professional development, and essentially how teachers are really being treated and valued in their schools. And then school community partnerships and how schools in the local community are really a resource to each other. And, we'll have in our panel, I think, some opportunities to kind of highlight connections to both these learning experiences and parts of these organizational culture elements. But essentially that through this work, our end goal is that our young people are informed and actively participating in their communities and have healthy civic dispositions. The process that we have for schools to become a democracy school is that we start with a pre-assessment, and this usually happens in the fall. So we'll see what happens this upcoming school year, depending on if folks are actually meeting in person. But essentially, schools are working on building a team, and the idea is that teams have teachers from different disciplines, students, and then also administration. So that the idea is that this is kind of a full school effort and really connecting to these ideas and these elements. And once they have their team in place, they're starting to get buy-in at their school for this process, they transition into the second phase, which involves a pretty extensive student survey. And we collect student data about their experiences with civic learning, what they think about their school climate, what they think about student voice in their schools. And then also we look at kind of get some civic engagement outcome data. So what are their thoughts around their sense of civic efficacy, intention to vote? And so, you know, schools get, and our foundation does the analysis of that data and gives individual schools reports on kind of what the students have shared as it relates to those questions. And then once the schools have that data, they move into phase 3 and they're looking at their student survey data, but then they're also looking at, you know, curriculum maps, what activities are they offering, interviewing various teachers and departments, and really collecting feedback from various stakeholders in the school to complete kind of a final assessment around each of the elements. And so they're able to say, you know, for student voice, I think we're really emerging. That's an area we really need to do some work on. But, you know, we're really strong at discussing current and controversial issues. And as a school completes that self-assessment, they're able to really reflect on where their strengths are, but then also identify some opportunities for growth. And, you know, just like most things in education, we really emphasize a continuous improvement process. And so as schools are identifying kind of what their goals are and areas of growth, we're then able to try to either connect them with schools that have similar goals or connect them to partners that might be able to support them to advance in those areas. And then the last piece of this is that once you become a democracy school, the Democracy Schools Network is an opportunity for these schools to really learn from each other. Our meetings have been a little bit different this second half of this past year, and we've been able to do some virtual conversations with teachers, and but we tend to have an annual convening in March and have an online forum, but we provide professional development on the various elements and essentially share data on democracy schools. And I think some of the panelists may also kind of speak to some of the experiences that they've had in engaging with these other schools, because these are all schools, again, that have really made this commitment to restoring that civic purpose. And so there is this shared purpose with everyone that's involved in the network. So I'm going to transition now. There was a lot of information. I was like, let me try to do this all in 5 minutes. But, you know, turn the floor over to the panelists here. And so we've got 3 panelists with us this morning. Lauren Cantasesi is a social studies teacher at George Westinghouse College Prep High School, which is located in Chicago. Brianna Croft is a rising senior at Normal West High School, which is kind of in the middle of the state. And then Jason Janzik is our social studies department chair at Grays Lake Central High School. And then, so I can stop sharing and let's see. And so just with those 3 panelists, what, you know, I'm gonna essentially have them really speak about what it's really meant for your school to be a democracy school. And so to start with, would love to actually hear from Jason first, if you can talk a little bit about how you've seen being a democracy school and how it's really had an effect on teaching and learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. We started off when we engaged in the democracy school process 7 years ago as something pretty much centered around social studies. We were feeling kind of left out with all of the state standardized testing going around math and English, and like, hey, we're doing some great stuff here. We wanted to look at, okay, how could we get support for social studies in particular? And so we joined the network, and then what we found was every class is a civics class. And as we formed that coalition, that there is teachers in life fitness, which is our gym class, English, math, hey, we're doing some of these ideas too, and what does this look like? And so that kind of opened the can of worms to those conversations about, okay, in life fitness, we talk about conflict resolution, we talk about leadership development, right? What happens how do we pick teams, right? Math, we're very inquiry driven, so how do we draw on the experiences of our students to make math classes a little bit more relevant? I don't want to say interesting because math is very interesting, in science classes, how do we have those tough conversations about controversial scientific issues as well? So what we started off as something that was very myopic around the social studies department, we found was transformational across all of our curriculum, which has been really kind of a added benefit to being a part of this network.
Great, thanks, Jason. Lauren, in your experience, how have you seen the effects on teaching and learning?
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for having me. To echo some of Jason's points, this being a democracy school has really radically shifted the way we think about teaching and student outcomes and learning. And at first, it slots in really easily into social studies, right? It fits into your gov class very easily. It fits into civics. And you have a lot of projects probably already going on there. And then kind of step two is to build it out into other departments. And that's definitely what we're still working on. But just to give a couple of examples, in our AP government class, the teachers are doing voter registration drives. We're escorting and chaperoning students to the polls. They do a mock election, and the civics classes showcase their action project. And all of those projects, even though they're in isolated classes, become field trips and part of school culture. Students know that they might get pulled into the auditorium to watch an election simulation, and now that's part of the tradition of the school. Students might take a field trip to the hallway to see what the civics students created, right? You're waiting for your basketball game and you see the seniors going to vote. You're waiting for lunch and you see students registering to vote. And so all of these things become a part of the culture of the building, and then it inspires other teachers to do some civics projects as well. And I agree that moving it into other departments is like step two in the real work of being a democracy school, but it's been an amazing network to be a part of.
Great, and one thing I'll add, Lauren, one of the opportunities our network's also providing this summer is we've been partnering to do this Guardians of Democracy online course, and we're doing a special cohort with democracy schools where they can, get professional development on best practices to discuss current and controversial issues. And I think Lauren has maybe 8 or 9 teachers, and there's like math teachers, foreign language teachers, English teachers, social studies teachers that are all going to be in this cohort and
right.
Participating in this great opportunity to strengthen their skills to facilitate this with their students. So I'm excited to kind of see how you all can build off of that too.
Right, and that just goes back to, I think it was Ted McConnell's point at the beginning, like there is right now far more of a need and a desire for teachers to be able to have those conversations in class, to talk about controversial issues, to talk about the news. And so when I sent out that network opportunity, I was flooded with responses in my inbox saying, I want to do this PD. Mm-hmm. So that culture is there in the school and the need is there as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Lauren. Brianna, so from a student's perspective, what kind of civic experiences have you seen in your classrooms as you've been attending a democracy school for the past few years?
So hi guys, thanks for having me. I've gotten a lot of major opportunities through my social studies courses where I've been able to go to last school year. I've been able to go to the MCFA town hall with legislators up in Chicago. And so I was able to just like hear from other people from Chicago what they want to see done from their legislators. And I've also been able to go to the Iowa pre-caucus campaigning events and have gotten to learn what it's like to be on the campaign trail, to be a presidential candidate. And so those larger opportunities have come from my social studies classes, but I've also had other opportunities through foreign language. So I took French, and my French teacher had us research the yellow vest protesting in France, and just like the history behind it, and then the current events, how that's affecting France. And it was a cool opportunity to just step back from our current events, but also take a look at other countries, like what's going on currently. And then we've also been able to compare what's happening there and how it might affect us. And our foreign language department is also very huge on getting students involved, and I know our Spanish teachers do a lot to get their students involved as well. And through FCA, we do a lot with the community. It's very student-led, and so we had the opportunity this year to raise money for a family in Haiti, and so we were able to, well, we planned to put on a lot of events to raise money for that and get the community involved, but unfortunately the pandemic struck and we weren't really able to go through with that. But in the past, there's been other opportunities where we've partnered with our community college to where people would donate books, and we could make an online library for I think it was El Salvador. The students would be able to access those through this online library. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing, Brianna. And so just, transitioning a little bit. So when we had those organizational culture elements, school climate was a big part of that. I think it's something that Ted mentioned that Civics now has kind of added to these elements. And so Jason, I know that your school has done a lot of work around this issue in particular, and would love for you to kind of share some of the work that you all have been doing as it relates to how you've been trying to address school
Absolutely.
climate.
Yeah. So we just finished up phase 2 and phase 3 of the process that Sonia spoke of earlier. And part of that component is surveying students and getting their thoughts on student voice, their thoughts on climate and things along those lines. And we're in a majority white district in the suburbs, the northern suburbs of Chicago. And so when we looked at the surface level data, we looked at student voice, and in general, in mass, the students' voice, everything looked good, right? But then what we ended up finding is, as we broke that down by ethnicity and by gender, is that gaps started showing up, and that our students of color and our Latinx students didn't feel they had as strong of a voice as our white students did based upon the data. And so we saw that, we got the data back, we sat down with our administrators and processed that. And then through the Democracy School Foundation, we were able to partner with Loyola University out of Chicago, and we're beginning that process now of identifying, okay, here are the 4 ideas, so the 4 main goals based upon the data that we see areas of growth for in Grays Lake Central. And without having that ability to break down that data by race, if we look at it basically on the surface and say, oh, our student voice is good, we don't really need to work on that. Without having that opportunity to do that, we would have students kind of falling through the cracks. And what was even more important was that Loyola, after we formed that partnership, came in and talked to our students. We had cohorts of students of color, Latinx students, Asian students, white students. And so we've got stories now behind the data. It's one thing to look at data on the screen and say, okay, 37% feel they left out, but what are their stories? What are their voices telling us besides just clicking something on a survey? That has proved incredibly helpful as we kind of chart the next steps over the next few years of where we want to take the school in terms of making sure that all students feel included. So it's been very beneficial to have that partnership. And then I'm going to speak a little bit later about some partnerships of schools that are facing similar ideas that we wouldn't be a network with without the Democracy School Foundation.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Jason. So transitioning, student voice is another key element of this work, and so this, it's not just about, I think, the school, but what does student voice maybe look like in the classroom? And Brianna, we have a student here with firsthand experience on this issue. So what have you seen as ways that Normal West has really tried to include student voice and student perspective in influencing the school?
So through my school, we have tried to set up student voices in partnering with BSU and FCA and Promise Council and other clubs and activities to be able to create a safe place, I would say, where students are able to speak their mind and are willing to come together and support each other. It kind of didn't really work out because of just timing, and you have all these other like sports commitments and everything. So we're hoping to do that next year or next school year if that works out. But we're hoping like for our student voices, our student leaders throughout all of these groups are connecting with each other and supporting each other, where if you don't, like for an example, there was a student that wanted to go to a town hall meeting and she didn't really feel comfortable going alone. So we've had students from other groups say, I'll go with you, and they'll partner together and support each other through that.
Great. So you can kind of really build community with each other to then support each other as leaders. Lauren, what have you noticed as some shifts with student voice in your school?
Yeah, right around the time we, transitioned to being a democracy school, it became very apparent that our student council had to be more than, as Ted mentioned, picking prom colors. And I will add, homecoming theme was a very controversial issue in the student council. And as wonderful as those events are, we then shifted it to be a student government, and we, rebranded it, but also had elections, and students had to have policy platforms, and administration has to meet with the student government, and we actually work on issues in the school, and they're supposed to actually represent their peers. And so it's taken years, but the student government is a really well-functioning team that really does represent student voice now, and we run homecoming. And so, we didn't reinvent the wheel here, but that process of having students as leaders and administration being accountable to those students and vice versa has led our administration to think all the time, oh, maybe we should have a student in this room. Like, oh, there's a race and equity committee. Let's get a student in there as well. And they'll email us, hey, Lauren, can you send a student gov rep? And so just that shift of administration thinking of students as people whose voices should be in adult-centered spaces has been really a phenomenal shift, and we're still working on it. It's certainly a work in progress, but now there are a lot more students in committee meetings, and the student government was a big part of that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Jason, any other thoughts on Grace Lake and how you've worked on student voice?
Absolutely. Just a couple of things following up on what Lauren and Brianna said. We also have a principals advisory committee that meets monthly with our principal, where it's open to anyone so long as you sign up for it. So it's not like I'm going to select the 30 best kids and then take them and talk to them. So our principals embrace that. We also have 2 student members, one from each school. We have 2 schools in our district on the school board. They're non-voting members of our school board, which has been pretty neat to see. And that has happened since we became a democracy school. And then I think the biggest shift that I've seen is that students feel empowered to create opportunities to have their voice heard. And what I mean by that is just this year, we have students forming the Black Student Union. Just this year, students wanted to form an Asian club, and so they found somebody to run the Asian club, and we're gonna make that happen. And our schools embrace that opportunity, as well as our students have embraced the opportunity to say, hey, why don't we form something so we could have our voices heard moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And in transitioning, one other aspect of this is, thinking about how this work might affect the ways that you view assessment. So Lauren, can you talk a little bit about how some of the work that Westinghouse has done around assessment and how that might connect to some democratic practices? And
Sure. So Westinghouse recently transitioned to Proficiency-Based Learning Pbl. I'm not sure if any of your schools use this. It's a system in which teachers create kind of key standards, and then students have practice opportunities to show proficiency. And so it's a move away from completion or compliance, and you don't really grade those things, but you grade based on whether they're proficient. And so this was a major shift in grading and assessment, in informative assessments, and it took kind of a demo year and then a full school rollout year. But that was done with student voices, right? Students were in those discussions. They were kind of troubleshooting it with us and workshopping it with us, because once we became a democracy school, we were constantly thinking about equity and some of those data points that Jason mentioned too, like where are there gaps in our GPAs, in our progress, and how can we fix that? And PBL was an attempt to do just that. And it's still not perfect. We just recently had a student government presentation at the PBL committee meeting because they were still concerned about early assessments and the impact on their grades. And now we are shifting based on what the students and teachers are saying. And so it really has changed the way we think about assessment, because the whole PBL shift came as a result of thinking more critically about equity and grading and student outcomes.
Great, thanks. Jason, any thoughts?
Sure, we've made a shift more towards authentic assessment. We're starting to go down the PBL way, but our first step was authentic assessment. And so one of the questions I posed to my team and then the Democracy School group is, where does student voice exist in our assessment? And so an example that I could think of is our economics team in assessing marginal analysis and marginal benefits and marginal cost, which, you know, high schoolers, Bree could probably attest to, is just exciting, thrilling stuff in economics. And what we found was we gave them the opportunity to have their voice heard. And so what they did was they said, okay, how do we improve the school? The teachers posed the questions, how do you improve the school for $100? What's the best way we can make $100 work to improve our school? What areas need growth in the school? Things along those lines. And students came up with presentations, presented them to the class, and then our principal came in during those presentations and said, whichever one you think is best, I'll give you the $100 and we'll make happen. And so the winning presentation that year we ran it was positive messaging in the female athletic and life fitness locker rooms, that it's a very insecure area for a lot of teenage girls. And so what the group proposed is $100 of just positive messaging on stickers, on lockers. You are beautiful, you got this, own today, that kind of stuff. And the principal put it forward, and the students across the entire student body loved it. And that goes so much further than just a multiple choice test of how do you maximize your resources and maximize the minimum resources that you have to get the maximum benefit. Students have a much more authentic experience in that case, and then it benefited the entire student body. So student voice in the authentic assessment has been kind of the key push for us over the past couple of years.
Great, thank you, Jason. So one final question, and then we can leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, but just as you know, this Indiana task force is really thinking about implementing something like this. What kind of advice would you give to districts that are interested in taking on a process like this, or, you know, and from Brianna's perspective, also maybe how students can really be engaged? What do you think is what's most important about this? And well, yeah, let's start with Lauren, or let's actually start with Brianna and then Lauren and Jason.
I'm sorry. To start, when I was asked to give a student perspective, to be honest, I didn't really know what a democracy school was, because it's just been such a part of our culture at my school, and I've been able to have all these opportunities, and so has other students. And so I think a big thing is to not just offer these opportunities in announcements, but to have teachers approach students and like see if they're interested in getting involved, because that's how I've been able to get involved with these big opportunities I've had, where I wasn't really the one in class who was speaking out, you know, sharing all of my opinions in class, but more of the quiet one. And then my teacher would just look at my work and say, or like ask me if I would want to get involved. And so through that, I've been able to come out of my shell a little bit and have been offered these opportunities. And so off of that, I think that you should give opportunities to the students who may not be as involved, because that's a good way to get others involved as well, and also work on listening and supporting the students to have a constructive conversation. Where at my school, I know if a student has an idea, then there's at least one teacher there who will be there to support and say, I've got you, I can sponsor this, what do you need me to do, how can I help you? And so that also creates like a safe place for students to know that they are supported from their ideas, and also to connect with people of differing views. So especially I know today everyone has differing views and it can get frustrating if one doesn't agree with the other, but I've learned that we've created a safe place for many students and to, you know, talk about those differing views and not conflict with each other. And so like also if a student has any ideas, have a teacher or an adult help make that happen or see how that they can help.
Great, thank you, Brianna. Lauren?
Yes, I love all of Brianna's ideas. I would also just point out one more time that if you're creating a teacher team in the school, to get teachers from across departments. Social studies teachers are always going to have kind of similar ideas, but once you get an art teacher in the room or a world language teacher in the room, you're going to have some different ideas and really think, you know, about innovation in the school and what you can make happen. So that's one. And two is to build on resources you already have, right? If you already have a student council, you don't have to, you know, disband it and burn it down, right? How can you shift it? If you already have a homeroom or an advisory system, how can you bring students into that? If you already have a teacher panel, right? So kind of think about what you have and your assets. Teachers are busy and no one wants to start building something that seems impossible, because you probably have some awesome teachers doing awesome work already and they don't know that they could be working together.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Jason, any other thoughts? Any
Yeah,
advice?
Lauren nailed it, right? In the school, you've got all these teachers that are working together. I'm going to take it one step further. You've got all these schools doing amazing things in your community, right? And the network piece has been incredibly invaluable for us. You know, we're going through a process right now evaluating our social studies curriculum, asking the questions of where do our students see themselves in the curriculum? And so as we begin that somewhat daunting task, we have a democracy school down at Hinsdale Central that said, hey, we've already done that. Here's the tool that we've used that we've found incredibly helpful. It's been tested. Go ahead and use this and give it a shot, right? And so now, to Lauren's point about not reinventing the wheel, it has been incredibly helpful as we navigate these tough times that Ted spoke of at the beginning, right? To have those partners saying, okay, we tried this and it worked. Or what do you do with this question and it worked? So it's definitely worth evaluating as you create that network across Indiana of all these schools doing great work. It's only that rising tide's going to raise all ships, which has been really helpful for us.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you so much to Brianna, Lauren, and Jason for, you know, sharing your wisdom with this group. And, you know, thank you again for inviting us to share. Hope this was helpful. And I'm not sure if we have time for Q&A or if you want to follow up offline, but.
Well, thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Jason, Lauren, and Brianna, for your insightful and stimulating presentations. And Joseph, do we have any questions in the chat box?
Yes, I can run through them very quick. There was one that was asked and answered, and Sonia mentioned that 74/69 schools were officially democracy schools in Illinois. How many schools were there altogether? And Sonia replied that there are 653 high schools in Illinois. The next question I've received is, as far as the student participation, are we finding them leaning towards a specific party? And if you have a good mixture of student parties, are they able to work together and have a constructive conversation?
I'll let the panelists talk to that, and maybe Jason and Brianna probably have maybe Lauren actually has some political variation at your school too, but
sure.
I think Jason and Brianna might have more.
We run a politics club where the discussions happen and anybody from any party helps, or anybody from any party is welcome. So it's not like the young Democrats or the young Republicans or the young Libertarians or something like that. It's just politics club, right? And what we have found is that when you open it up that far, it allows for students to have those free exchange of ideas with an adult present. In terms of identifying, I can't really speak to that. We don't ask kids what their political ideology is or anything along those lines, but making sure that when we have these organizations that happen, that they're welcoming to all different types of ideologies would be key moving forward.
Another thing off of that, I know coming from a student standpoint, it's easier for us to, figure out other students' political beliefs. And so I know that majority of the students involved in Student Voices lean toward the Democratic side, where there's less Republicans or conservative views involved in that. But even though that may be so, there's still like opportunities for all of us to listen and understand each other. And so I don't think that it's hard for those differing political views to come together, where we all just, have a safe place. And there's, I've never experienced any arguing or anything, but yeah.
All right, thank you both. And the next question is, what was the first school named a democracy school and what year?
In 2006, we had 4 schools that were recognized. I think Bartlett High School alphabetically, I guess, was the first school. I think they claimed that they were the first democracy school because they were first in the alphabet. But there were 4 high schools, and they were all at the time suburban schools. And then over the past over 10 years now, we've been able to expand out to different parts of the state.
All right, well, thank you, and back to you, Governor.
Thank you. Is there anyone on the phone that has a question for our presenters? I have one kind of question. For those, and I think we find this regardless of what state we're in, that depending upon the part of the state, we may have a student body that is more liberal or a student body that is more conservative. And so, do you all ever have presenters from opposing, like if you're more liberal, as Brianna said, do you bring in conservative presenters who present that opposite viewpoint for discussion? And it would work vice versa, so that there is that robust kind of discussion and students are exposed to the other side.
I could speak to that, Governor. When we have our candidates days, we make sure that politicians from both sides are invited. And we are not allowed to bring one in without inviting the other. So if we have a congresswoman, or in our case, a congressman now, who loves to come in and talk to the students, well, now that it's an election year, we're going to bring your opponent in as well. We're at least going to give them the opportunity to do so. So making sure that there's equal time, especially in an election year, is vital for us, vital for our administration, making sure that everybody is hearing both sides, or at least having the opportunity to hear both sides.
Sure, thank you.
And just briefly from Westinghouse, because we do have a far more homogenous political environment, we're on the west side of the city. Students often hate this, but we will assign them who they're representing in a certain debate or in the mock trial or in the mock election. And at first they're really angry that they're going to represent a position that they don't personally support, but that makes them dig deeper to understand that other side and to really argue it. And sometimes those students end up doing a better job and more thorough research because they didn't initially support it. So that's kind of how we deal with the issue of not necessarily showing both sides if we were only to poll students' personal beliefs.
Yeah, and to that, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. Go ahead.
To that end, the democracy schools allowed us some professional development in something that's called the structured academic controversy, which is to what Lauren was talking about, where we assign students sides, and sometimes it is the other side. So when we look at a controversial issue, students are required to do the other side, but then also have conversations from that perspective and then reach consensus, right? And so that's a teaching tool that we have found professional development through with the Democracy School Network. Sorry for cutting you off there.
No. A follow-up question. So when you have these events, candidate events, or events where people have to present other sides, are parents ever invited so that the parents can hear the opposite viewpoint?
Oh yeah, our auditorium is usually full on mock election debate day with students, with parents, with other teachers. Teachers just want to come and hear it, and community members. So that's one example where parents are always there, but we could certainly do more parent involvement.
Right. Any other questions? Well, thank you. Thank you, Sonia and Jason, Lauren, and Brianna. Thank you for, again, that stimulating conversation and presentation. And if you're following along on our agenda, our next panel has speakers from multiple perspectives on the innovation and structure of teaching civic education. We will start with Beth Radley. Beth is a senior technical assistant consultant in state services at American Institutes for Research. She works with Great Lakes and Midwest Comprehensive Centers to assist state education agencies and intermediate school districts with implementation of the Common Core state standards. Beth has 16 years of experience in public school education and teaches undergraduate social study methods and courses. So Beth, with that introduction, I will turn it over to you and allow you to introduce your co-panelists. And I believe you have about 25 minutes per presentation, so we look forward to it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Always have to check when we're on Zoom, multiple Zoom meetings all of the time, but thank you. I am honored to be here. I am so passionate about these discussions, and I'm very excited that we're really getting into the heart of what makes civic education impactful for kids. What I'll do is I will do the beginning of the presentation, and then the most exciting part is actually the practice part. So I'm just teeing up the conversation, and if I could ask my panelists to introduce themselves, it would be great if you could do that right now, and then we'll go in into the discussion.
I can start off. Can everyone hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. My name is Ryan Susky. I'm Director of Professional Development and Programs at the Ohio Center for Law-Related Education. We're the civic education group for the state of Ohio.
Thank you, Ryan. Greg, are you on? Greg?
I think you're muted, Greg.
Another common.
Sorry about that. My name's Greg Scheller. I'm a government teacher from Evansville, Indiana, and a participant in the We the People program.
Thank you. And the underlying, just full disclosure, we have all been engaged in the We the People program, so I'm excited for them to share it with you. I am actually in Wisconsin. I taught the program for a long time, over 10 years. My very first institute in the program was in Indiana. It was the very first We the People Institute. So I'm very passionate about that. And that's actually where my passion came from for the whole concept of civic education, as well as getting students engaged in authentic assessment. So that will be full disclosure in terms of that. Let's talk a little bit. So I am just giving you kind of the 10,000-foot view about the concept of authentic assessment, and then my co-panelists are going to give you kind of see the power in it for students, and we will engage in sharing exactly what this means for students. So let me in presentation mode, and I can send this to anybody that needs the PowerPoint after. It's coming. There we go. And everybody can see the PowerPoint in my screen. Perfect. Authentic assessments in civics, what is it and how do we do it? In the chat box, if you could just jot down quickly, when you think of the concept of assessment in civics particularly, what do you think of? What comes to mind when you think of assessment in civics? Just jot down in the chat box. Get out so I can see what you're saying here. Citizenship exam, testing of some kind, the citizenship test, AP Gov, self-reflection, testing, high stakes, doing civics activities and promoting engagement. Some really good ideas. Responsibility, that's an interesting one. I like that one. So people have different perceptions of, sorry, I have to, toggle between these, of the concept of assessment. And I think it's even more powerful than ever to think about the concept of assessment when we're talking about civics and what we know about civics and tying it back to the work around standards and curriculum. So why is assessment important? It's a focus on our check-in with students. So we have standards, we have curriculum, we have all these different components. It's the big question is, are my students engaging in what they need to engage in? Are they being successful? Are they able to demonstrate their understanding? So assessment is key. There's different types of assessment, right? We have formative assessments and summative assessments. So in the educational system. So what I've heard before is how do you correlate the concept between formative and summative? Well, formative is more like a CAT scan. If you go to the doctor for a CAT scan, they're checking to figure out what's going on and to make some decisions. That's what teachers use as check-ins throughout their learning and throughout working with students. The summative assessment is more of an autopsy. You can't do a lot about it, but you're getting a sense of kind of what happened. So we really focus a lot in education more on those formative check-ins and different strategies like a structured academic controversy, which could be actually either. That was talked about in the last panel. It's a powerful way for students to demonstrate their understanding in different ways and in different conversations. And so that's the key to assessment. It helps us as educators to step back and say, are they really getting what we thought they did? And really having those hard questions and giving us a sense of data and data points for that part of the conversation. And really stepping back and having those conversations about, are they really learning what they're supposed to be? And then also, is there a better way to do this? If they aren't getting it, is there a better way? If they are getting it, who is and why? So assessment should be give teachers and teacher teams data about students and how they're demonstrating the understanding of what our expectations are for them and what the curriculum and standards outline. These are the three kind of questions when you think about learning and when teachers are engaged in questioning about learning that's happening in the classroom. The first question is, what do students need to know and be able to do? That's always the first question. You get a lot of that from the standards and really kind of housed in any national documents or state documents is where we identify what do students need to know and be able to do. The second big question is this assessment question. How will we know? And that's where assessment is key, is if we're outlining these are the big picture things that all students need to know and be able to do, then we need to be sure to have assessment tools and strategies to better understand that they are learning it, because it's important. You can't just keep going on if they don't have these foundations of learning, and that's where assessment is key. And then that last question is, how will we get students there? That's really how the teacher makes decisions based on those assessments about how to best help kids reach what do we know, what do we want them to know and be able to do. And one of the key aspects, particularly in civics, I would say in all social studies, is the concept of authentic assessment. The civics really requires authentic assessment, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But Linda Darling-Hammond, top educator in the field, talks about authentic assessments this way. It requires students to develop something, to be engaged, and to analyze and problem solve and reason. And it's something that gives them value beyond the classroom. That's what makes it authentic. It makes it where they can find value to themselves. It could be value to the community, but it's where they can see the purpose of what they're learning. And an authentic assessment gives them the opportunity to do that. They're asked to perform real-world tasks in authentic assessments that demonstrate meaningful application. So it's not just I'm learning these facts and figures. Now I need to figure out what that means in the real world. It means to me. So it really helps them apply the knowledge that they're learning. They still need that depth of knowledge and skills and really working with those concepts and ideas, but this gives the authentic assessments gives us the understanding of that they can actually use that in the real world and apply it. Authentic assessments are engaging, and they really look at problem solving and questions of importance, and that helps them put the knowledge to practice that they've been learning in the classroom. They ask students to think and produce, and they really, hopefully, authentic assessments lead to a tangible product or performance that you can see that they're learning, but they're really engaged, and it's a very powerful experience for the students. So you have the selected response, which many of you said, the citizenship test, which is a selected response. It's a multiple choice piece, which is important as well. It can give you some data, but it also, what an authentic assessment does, it asks students to take action on that knowledge that they know. You can't do that in a paper pencil test. And civics is about taking action and really being engaged and understanding and asking questions. And that's why authentic assessments correlate so closely to civics. They integrate that teaching and learning. They provide multiple past demonstrations, so it's not one, you have to do it this way. You'll see that when they start talking about the We the People and the actual examples of authentic assessments, that students don't have to approach it in the same way, but they're really working through and providing us opportunities to see how they can use the content and skills that they've learned in the classroom. You know, we've talked about those 6 proven practices, but if you look at them, they require authentic assessment, right? You need the base of classroom instruction, you need the content, you need the study in civics, government, history, economics, geography, but we need to see what they can do with it, and that's where authentic assessment plays a role. Discussion of current events and controversial issues, that is authentic. Just going around key questions that are at the heart of civics and having them discuss it and engaging in controversial issue discussions is really powerful and is authentic, because those are real world skills and real world conversations that need to happen, and we need to prepare students to be engaged in. Service learning is authentic assessment. Extracurricular activities, you know, being in mock trial, all of these different components that you've heard of already and that you know of that are even outside of the classroom, student government, being on a school board, those are authentic, and that can be used as assessments because it's really getting kids to engage with their knowledge skills and skills that they're learning in school. School governance, simulations of democratic processes, that's going back to something like a mock trial or We the People, that are really truly authentic. So you can see if we house our work around civics in these 6 proven practices, they require us to engage in authentic assessment. This is the benefits. I mean, it really gets at the heart. We just talked about, you know, students' demonstration. You can see what they're doing, real world application of these complex skills. Students are actively demonstrating their learning. We can see how they can expand this beyond the classroom. That's giving value to them. And they're typically more engaging for students because students have to be engaged in the process and doing something to show us what they've been learning. This is the assessment continuum, the depth of learning. We can see selected response items, short constructed. So if I can define those quickly, selected response are definitely like your multiple choice questions. Short constructed response are just short answer. Long constructed response might be paragraphs or kind of essays. Standardized performance tasks. So it would be things that you're asking students to do, but they're still basically using paper and pencil or looking at some documents online and writing about it. Complex performance, you're getting complex performance assessment tasks, or you're getting higher where you're asking them to perform it, but it's in a controlled environment. It's not quite as real world. Whereas you get to complex extended projects, which are more of your authentic assessments, which the last 2 are probably closer to authentic assessments, you really get at the heart of what understanding the knowledge, skills, work habits, and dispositions that students are engaged in, and you can see it, and it makes it valuable for them, not only you to be able to see what they've learned, they can see the value of what they're learning. So you can see, if you go earlier in the depth of learning kind of continuum, it's more getting at understanding what students know and being able to do that in a paper and pencil test. Where it goes up, it becomes more authentic. You get a better sense of how all of these different things play a role, and you get a better sense of the students, all of the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that we want to see, particularly in civics, and how they can do it. You can't do that on a paper and pencil test. Challenges, they can be costly. We have to problem solve and think about how to do that. It takes time to develop them. There are some developed, which you're going to learn about. The feasibility and really looking at it about professional development and giving teachers the professional development they need to engage in authentic assessments with students. There's a whole kind of idea about how to provide accommodations around that. And then the scoring piece, it's hard because, we're trying to figure out, particularly you'll hear in the We the People, that you have different judges, but you have a common scoring rubric. So there's a way to get through these challenges. We just need to think of them ahead of time as we're developing them. These are the key kind of components that we need to think about in terms of authentic assessment, that their performance outcomes, they're task focused, they really build on rich student language. You're getting students to talk about things. Students are engaged and connected to curriculum instruction. So what I want to end on is the curriculum and instruction piece, particularly in Indiana and other states. So my work is around standards, and I'm working in probably 33 states right now on different standards and trying to facilitate the process of academic standards. and the development of them. And right now we're seeing the trends that they're really getting kids to think, problem solve, require critical thinking. And it's to prepare learners who can perform with their knowledge. So if you see, we haven't talked much about the C3 framework, but there are dimensions. It's a national framework for civics and social studies, all the different components you can see, but civics has a role in that. But what they talk about is how important it is to get students to develop questions and plan inquiries. Then you have the dimension 2 really focuses on that content piece and knowledge. And then dimension 3 gets them looking at evidence and evaluating evidence and using evidence to eventually take informed action and communicate conclusions. A lot of states are using this to build their standards off of, and a lot of districts are using this to help kids engage in authentic assessments. So I wanted to give you the Hawaii ones for an example. They have these anchor standards, and it requires authentic assessment. You can see if we are engaging kids and expecting kids in civics to engage in inquiry, it requires authentic assessments, because it's paper and pencil tests, they can't do most of these things, particularly taking informed action. And so if we look at the Indiana standards, you have it built into, they're talking about foundations of government. They're required to look at functions of government in elementary and middle school. And you look in high school, and it's asking them to compare and contrast ideas in government, identify and define ideas, explain, analyze the interactions. They have, in order to get to these standards and in order to accomplish these standards, they need to think about how to build authentic assessments to get kids engaged in these activities. I have some resources in the PowerPoint, and I can definitely send that, so it's sent out to all of you. You can have it, but I'd really like to spend some time with the panelists to better describe what this looks like in practice and make it real for you all. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think, Ryan, I think you're up next.
Yes, absolutely. So first, of course, just a thank you to Lieutenant Governor Crouch and to the Indiana Bar Foundation for the invitation to be here. You know, this is a really big undertaking, and so we're all happy to share what we're learning and experiencing in the different states, and to, you know, hopefully really, you know, as Ted mentioned, right, the rising tide lifts all ships. So I'm going to try to take some of this maybe from the theoretical perspective into the more practical, right, and thinking about, you know, what does this actually look like on the ground? Are you able to see my screen? Excellent. All right. So a lot of this really gets rooted in what we call authentic intellectual work, right? And assessments are one portion of that. But if we're thinking about the proven practices, that idea of rigorous classroom instruction around civics becomes really key. And so if we're starting to kind of think about what this looks like, the AIW, Authentic Intellectual Work Framework, talks about 3 criteria: student construction of knowledge, right? So teachers are not handing students fully formed chunks of information. Instead, students are putting together ideas based on the content they're being given, using disciplined inquiry in the sense of, you know, both discipline and inquiry being important. Discipline related to the field they're studying. So if it's mathematics, they're using tools and techniques in math. If it's in civics, they're using tools and techniques that are relevant to civics. And then inquiry, and the idea that students aren't just being asked to regurgitate information, instead they're being asked to wrestle with questions. And the last criteria of AIW is having value beyond the classroom, right? Something they can use in the outside world. So if we're thinking about the kinds of things we tend to ask students to do, right? And for our teachers in the room, this chart might look familiar, but you're probably thinking, wait a second, that's upside down. Because ordinarily when we're looking at the tasks we ask students to do, we spend a lot of time down here in remembering and understanding, right? Getting students to remember information that they've been given either from their textbook or from their teachers when they're lecturing, and then understanding, right? Making sense of the information they're being given. But when we're starting to push for more authentic assessments and thinking about authentic intellectual work in the classroom, particularly in civics, we need to be spending a lot more time up here in the evaluation and analysis phase, right? Taking information apart and exploring the relationships between information, examining information and making judgments. So what does this actually sort of look like, right? So here is a question that you might commonly see on a much lower order thinking assessment, right? I would argue a less authentic assessment, right? What were the major differences between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists? If we're thinking about what students actually have to do in this task, in this question, ultimately, all we're asking for is, hey, spit back the answer that you memorized from the textbook, right? If they simply know that one wants a strong national government and one doesn't, they can knock this question out pretty quickly. But authentic assessment starts drilling deeper, right? Now we're looking for student construction of knowledge. So we might ask, how did the arguments of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists reflect their points of view regarding natural rights, republicanism, and powers of the states? Right, because now we're going deeper into this. We're not just saying, hey, spit back the definitions of each of these, but instead we're saying, take what you know about each of these topics and see how they start fitting together, right? Because the chapter of the book is probably not going to say, okay, well, the Federalists had this view on natural rights, and here's how republicanism fits in. But now we're asking students to start assembling information. And when you start looking at authentic assessments, you can go even deeper. Why are the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debates still relevant today? By asking students these 3 questions, we're slowly bumping their understanding further up what we call Bloom's taxonomy to get more and more complex thought for students to tackle. So this kind of shows the difference between traditional standardized assessments and what you might see on a more authentic assessment. And this question actually comes from the We the People program. So this is a question that students doing the We the People program would have to research and then actually present to a panel of judges and have a discussion. And that discussion really is something that's key in this stretch for more authentic assessments. We're trying to increase dialogue through authentic intellectual work. And it's really important that we think about dialogue is more than just talking, right? Dialogue isn't just, hey, we're having a conversation, but what we call the dialogic exchange of knowledge has 3 assumptions. 1, multiple thoughts, approaches, facts, and ideas can coexist on a topic, right? There's not just one correct response. 2, the exposition of those multiple approaches and ideas builds greater understanding. And 3, each party to that dialogue benefits from the greater understanding. So dialogue is different than just discussion, right? And dialogue isn't just recitation or practice of content. Dialogue really is about creating new space, right? You take what you have and I have what I have, we kind of throw that in the middle and mix it up and we start getting greater understanding of an issue. And that's the kind of thing that authentic assessments are really pushing for. So as we're thinking about in civics, what that would look like, it's creating venues and spaces where students can actually have these dialogues, both with themselves and with outside thought partners. I'm going to skip this for now. And I want to kind of close on what civic education groups like the Indiana Bar Foundation Civic Education Section and the Civics Renewal Network, the role of civic education groups in this whole discussion really is we can provide a space where teachers don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? Day-to-day curriculum construction is already a really time-consuming task for teachers. And so it's really important for them to have a space they can go to get these kinds of authentic assessments that are pre-built, that they know are integrated into their curriculum, and that they know have been vetted by experts. Additionally, the push for something new isn't always a productive aim, right? It's one of the challenges, right, especially of grant-based funding, that often you need to create something new to justify the existence of the grant. But the reality is there's already a lot of really fantastic organizations and programs out there that are creating these models. And so supporting their, kind of proliferation becomes a more productive aim in this space. And lastly, just that statewide organizations have a lot more leverage than a teacher in a single classroom or even a district is going to have. It can often be challenging for a teacher who wants to tackle this to get administrative support or to find the funding to make these things happen, right? Taking students out of the classroom to go to a town council meeting isn't always free, right? And so having the support of a statewide organization who can justify why this matters and also sometimes put some money behind it becomes a really helpful thing in supporting these authentic programs. So I want to make sure we're leaving time for Greg as the classroom educator who can really talk to how this looks in the classroom and what he's seeing on the ground.
Thank you, Ryan. I just want to hit on some points on the authentic assessment that the We the People on the high school level, and I teach only high school, the research analysis, the debate and discussion within the units, cooperative learning. My students are put into a unit in which they're expected to become an expert on a portion or a concept of the Constitution. Basically, this is holding students accountable. It's student, not teacher-centered, which is good for a teacher. You know, I let them kind of take control and basically let the questions drive wherever they want to take them. You know, I also teach regular government. My We the People happens to be taught for college credit. I teach it through the University of Southern Indiana. As my normal government class would probably range in the depth of knowledge, and I try to, you know, bring in the 3s and 4s on the depths of knowledge, but even the citizenship test, you know, the rote memorization stuff, you know, the We the People it takes it, as Ryan touched upon, to the higher levels. So the nuts and bolts of how the We the People works is that each unit is given 3 questions, and basically they participate in a simulated congressional hearing. The groups prepare a 4-minute opening to the questions, and which is followed by follow-up questioning from judges. And hopefully you'll be able to see this, but I wanted to share with you, and hopefully this is popping up on the screen. Here's a sample questions for unit, well, I'm going to go to unit 5 if possible, since I think this was going to be very important this year. But I want to go to question number 2 on unit 5. This was a state question last year. The United States Supreme Court has used a 2-pronged test to evaluate speech. First, speech can be prohibited if it is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and second, if it is likely to incite or produce such action. Using the test, the court held in the Ohio law violated Clarence Brandenburg's right to speech in Brandenburg versus Ohio. Do you agree or disagree with the court's decision and use the 2-pronged test? Under what conditions, if any, should freedom of expression be limited? Why is freedom of expression necessary part of representative government? So as you can see through the question, they are going to have to obviously research and analyze First Amendment rights, limitations on those rights. Obviously, they're going to have debate and discussions. What I really like about it is the preparation for the culminating activity, which is this simulated congressional hearing, because it promotes trial and error learning. I like trial and error learning because, you know, when we first start tackling these questions early in the school year, you know, they're going to have to gain some knowledge on the content. And the We the People program, the curriculum, which was developed through the Center of Civic Education, is divided into 6 units. And you know, I go through all 6 units every semester. But you know, it's a journey to get to this portion of the curriculum. You know, the trial and error learning. You know, we learn from our mistakes, and you know, and hopefully, and it usually happens, we usually get to this aha moment where the light bulb goes off. So this is just one example of the type of questions that are asked of my students. And you know, when you hear assessment, you think test. How am I going to be graded? You know, that students always want to know, how am I going to be graded? So I'm going to go ahead and put up the scoring rubric to see how hopefully this will go in. Well, I think it's in the drop-down box of the scoring rubric, and I know I'm kind of short on time here, but the units are graded on understanding, constitutional application, reasoning, supportive evidence, responsiveness, and participation. And the great thing about it, it's immediate feedback. When the students are finished with their testimony, the judges give immediate feedback. You know, that as a teacher, you know, my students always want to know, how well did I do? How did it go? And, you know, it's trial and error, and the students will typically know if they've done well or not. And through practicing, you know, this is a 10-minute activity in front of a group of judges, but we have practiced so much in the classroom that we've done this activity so many times. And the thing about it is that not only are they getting a civic education, but they're also learning important skills. These skills of authentic assessment can be carried over into an English class, a chemistry class. You know, skills are important. And, you know, as a government teacher, I like to be able to teach those skills using civics as the basis. But as far as the research goes, you know, Richard Brody of Stanford University said that the program was effective in promoting political tolerance because participating students feel more politically effective and perceive fewer limits on their own political freedom. And I think today, especially now in the times of social and civil movements in America, I can tell you personally, I cannot wait to start school in August and start dealing with these issues with my class. Of course, it's an election year. You know, there are studies about the We the People program, the American National Election Study of 2000, 82% of the We the People students are going to vote versus 48% who are not involved in the program. I contend that that's even higher. My We the People students will vote. They are actively engaged. They buy into the concept that they are the government. And when you give the student ownership of that, that's the kind of results that you get. So that's sort of an application on my perspective. But I've been teaching We the People at the high school level since 1999. And thanks to the Indiana Bar Foundation and the support that we've gotten from them, you know, so financially and of course their members help us prepare for competition. You know, the students, America is better for it. So.
Great. Well, Beth, does that conclude your presentation from your panelists?
It does. I mean, I don't know how much time we have for questions. I see there's one. Can I elaborate on how the data that is collected is used within states and nationally? I need a little bit of clarity on that in terms of, Scott, what are you thinking in terms of what data? The only testing data that we would have in terms of across states or nationally is the NAEP data, and that primarily is a pencil and paper test. So authentic assessments, we don't. We do have some data on programs like We the People or Project Citizen or some other of the national programs. There's some research on that data, but there isn't like a comprehensive national set of data unless we go to the National Assessment of Educational Progress for Civics in terms of getting that sense of data, but that wouldn't be connected back to authentic assessments. But as Greg was saying, there are some research reports, particularly on the We the People and Project Citizen programs, that are authentic assessments that show the impact on students and their learning.
Joseph, are there any other questions?
That is all. Thank you, Governor.
Any questions from our participants on the phones? Well, thank you, Beth and Ryan and Greg from my hometown of Evansville. Thank you all for being here and for that very insightful presentation. And our last panel includes Emma Humphreys, who is the current Chief Education Officer at iCivics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She has been with that organization since February of 2016 and began her career in education as a classroom teacher in North Florida. Her background and knowledge in political science and education has propelled her into this leading role at Sandra Day O'Connor's organization. Emma, welcome, and if you could also introduce your panelists, we would appreciate it, and I believe you also have about 25 minutes. So thank you, Emma, for being with us.
Terrific. Thank you, Governor, and thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, terrific. My screen wasn't lighting up. And thank you to the Indiana Bar Foundation for having me and for having Molly Malloy-Joel from Thomas Jefferson Middle School in Valparaiso, Indiana. She will be chiming in from time to time throughout my presentation to offer insights on sort of the classroom practicalities of using games in civic education. So with that, something I like to say often about iCivics is come for the games because that's what we're known for, but stay for the over 230 fun, effective, and free learning resources. And that's sort of an important point as I go through this presentation, that although we have these incredible games, they are really supported and buttressed and able to provide that full comprehensive learning experience by other resources, not just sort of as standalone experiences. But since we're talking about innovations and since games are truly what put iCivics on the map, let's go ahead and start with the games. So at iCivics, we have 20 fun, free, effective games. You can jump on anytime and play them. And I want to talk about why games. Justice O'Connor, when she founded iCivics, she wanted to give teachers what they needed. And so she convened them and said, tell me what you need. And they said, we need off-the-shelf, standards-based materials that are really based on the realities of the classroom. And then she went and talked to some other people, and she talked to a man named James G. at Arizona State University, and he said, you should make games. So the teachers didn't ask for games, but Dr. James G. convinced Justice O'Connor that she should go after games. And here's a few of the reasons why. And you can read these reasons about how games really support student identities at school. But for me, the bottom line is, for a lot of kids, school is not a positive experience. And whether they're in the classroom or more and more today online, they don't like school. School doesn't feel natural to them. Their school-based identities are damaged. Games can help. Games can make it better. And that's sort of the bottom line there. So another important point to make is that games aren't just a great educational pedagogy in general, although they are, but they're really great for civics, because civics is really about process and motivation. And a problem with civics is that there's a lot of important civic processes that students can't experience. They can't right now, or maybe even ever, be president or Supreme Court justice or a county manager. And these games allow them to experience those really critical roles that are foundational to understanding the American system in our institutions. So games are just a beautiful match with civic education in general. Let me go back here actually and take a pause to ask Molly to jump in and tell us why she thinks games are an effective pedagogy to build upon what I've already shared.
Well, I teach 8th grade, and let me tell you, they love games. And so what I do is you hook them with the games. You really do hook them with the games. But I really encourage you all to go to icivics.org and play Win the White House. That more effectively teaches the Electoral College in a classroom session than I could do in a week with a lecture, a PowerPoint, a video, whatever. Because at the end of that game, my kids say, oh my gosh, I've got to get Texas, I've got to get California, I've got to get New York if I want to win the White House. And then I get to talk to them about Indiana's role in the Electoral College and what's important about that. So I don't have to worry about them not understanding the big picture. And that's what iCivics really does well, because it's so easy to integrate in our already current curriculum. And the best thing, it's free. It is free. I've been using it for over 10 years. It's amazing. I really have to encourage each of you. The best thing you can do is to go to icivics.org and play a game, any game. I love Activate, Newsfeed, Defender. It's huge, and it's really, really effective. And my kids love it when I say, okay, today we're going to be in iCivics, and they just love it, absolutely love it.
Thank you, Molly. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you mentioning Win the White House. It's one of our most popular games. And I like to tell the story of my first political memory, which occurred on election night in the 1992 election. And I was watching the returns come in with my father. I was an elementary age kid at the time. And I didn't understand why Ross Perot was receiving so many popular votes, but wasn't winning any electoral votes, not one, not any states. And so my poor father, he's a plumbing contractor. He's well educated. He follows the news. But how do you explain to an 8-year-old how the Electoral College works, sitting right there in front of the television on election night? He did his best, but I bet he wished he had Win the White House to say, all right, Emma, let's go play this game. And by the time you're done playing the game, I assure you, you would understand. And we find that to be true across the board. That game was recently re-released with new art, all new issues to be sort of more up to date with the 2020 election. And you can also play it in Spanish now, which is really exciting. So I want to take a moment to say what games are really great for, and then next acknowledge what they're not great for. So they're great for really any kind of grouping. And what we're finding more and more is that they're great whether you're in the classroom with your students, as I know our teachers want to be, or whether for various reasons like a pandemic, you're at home and you're engaging in distance learning. So it really doesn't matter what setup you have, what access to technology you have, you can make our games work in any of them. They're great for homework with students have tech and internet access. They're great to sort of like trick kids into learning, like, oh yeah, we're just gonna have a fun day today. We're just gonna play games and Next thing you know it, they understand all of their civil liberties as guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. You can use them to introduce topics, reinforce topics, review topics. And then what's really important is that they allow teachers to hit major content and skills-based standards at the same time while the kids are having fun. Really a win-win. I want to acknowledge what they're not great for, and we try to be really upfront with teachers. First of all, they're terrible on old browsers and out-of-date technology, and we do everything we can to sort of MacGyver a fix for teachers when they're dealing with that. But it is really a challenge. You need up-to-date technologies. We have to run really fast to keep our games up to date. They do not replace instruction. I'm sure that's a given. And they're not assessments. So we just had an awesome panel on presentations. I'm a huge fan of the We the People program and the way they do such authentic assessments. Games are not assessments, and you really shouldn't use game scores as as grades. They can give you a good indication of what kids are getting and where they're sort of getting stuck, but they're not evaluative, particularly not as a summative assessment. So when I present to teachers, I like to ask them this question and provide these responses. So what is the best way to use games in the classroom? And a lot of times I hear all of the above. And my response is, you're absolutely right. iCivics games are great for all of these scenarios, to reward students, to have a fun day, to introduce new topics, to help them master some simpler topics. And to give students meaningful tasks to do when they finish their real work, other than just put their head down or work on homework for math class. But the best way, and this is a really important point, the best way is to round out an engaging sequence of learning activities designed to foster understanding of content. And so this brings me back to that original point where I mentioned that we have over 230 free resources. Only 20 of those are games. And those other resources, when packaged with games, can provide a really robust, really comprehensive learning experience. And I'd like to give an example of what we mean by that. The games are great by themselves. They can truly stand alone. You can walk into class one day and have the computer set up and have kids sit down and play Win the White House or Do I Have a Right or Counties Work. It's no problem. But they're so much more effective when we teach around them. And so at iCivics, we like to provide those resources for teachers to teach around them because we know their time is limited. So we've created something, the approach is sort of like a delicious, effective game sandwich where you have the experience wrapped around the game. And to support this pedagogy, to support this very brilliant trademarked iCivics game sandwich approach, we've created the game extension packs. So with our most popular games, and after we update every game, we provide these extension packs. So teachers have everything they need to teach around the games. Again, the games can stand alone, that's great, but we know they're more effective when teachers teach around them. So the iCivics extension packs have a starter activity and then a mini lesson, and then the students play the game, and then there's a post-game activity and opportunities for reflection and an assessment. So Molly, I was hoping you could chat a little bit about how you're able to integrate our games and our resources into your instruction, given the wealth of other incredible resources, as well as sort of the demands, the realities of the classroom, particularly the lack of instructional time or the limited instructional time that you have.
Right, so my teaching partner and I both completely use the iCivics curriculum unit on the Constitution instead of our textbook. Just because it was just like with a sandwich or a hamburger, you can get it plain or you can get cheese on it or you can get whatever you want. Justin and I were able to pull and put in what we wanted to use for that whole unit. So it's really accessible in terms of grab and go, and then you can customize it for your students, for your classroom. So like what Justin did and what I did were basically the same, using the same curriculum, but we adjusted it each for our teaching styles. It is so user-friendly with the curriculum, and you can search for lessons using the state standards for Indiana, which makes it really easy. So the cool thing about iCivics is great because it covers curriculum from grade 5 all the way to senior. They have a great AP support course that goes with that. So like I presented to the Indiana Middle Level Education Association twice and for the last 2 years, and I present to my own school corporation to all of the secondary. So it is a really wide-ranging program that you can tailor to each individual school corporation's needs, but also you could say, here's what we need to do in the state of Indiana, because it has all of the curriculum support along with the games, which hooks the kids in, and it is really easy to use.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Molly. And yeah, we pride ourselves on having these resources that the teachers can package and bundle however they see fit. Everything is designed to be sort of off the shelf, ready to use, mix and match, and not just with our resources, but with resources from the incredible number of other high quality civic education providers and programs out there, like We the People, like the Center on Engaging Congress, like the Bill of Rights Institute. I could go on. So let's take a look at our game so you have a sense of what I mean. There's really no way for me to do this in a presentation to really demonstrate how powerful and fun they are. So I just can only encourage you to jump on the site and hit play. You go to icivics.org, you hit play, and you don't have to sign in, you don't have to do anything. You can pick a game. We have, like I said, 20 of them covering all these different topics. You click a game and you just start playing. And so you can argue before the Supreme Court in argument wars. You can navigate our court system in court quests. You can run a county and county's work. You can be a constitutional lawyer, helping individuals who've had their rights infringed upon. You can run the Oval Office. You can be president. All these important roles that you can simulate through iCivics games. You can run for office and win the White House. You can, oh, my favorite one, our first history game. You can be a pamphleteer during the constitutional era, during the constitutional convention, or just after the constitutional convention, roaming the colonies, interviewing folks across the colonies, trying to determine why they're supporting or not supporting the proposed constitution. These are all things you can do, and you can just jump on at any point, click play, and play away, and I encourage you to do so. Another really cool thing is that we're able to make that connection between the learning happening online and the real world. So when you play iCivics games, you earn impact points, and then you can use those impact points kind of as votes. You donate your impact points to actual nonprofits, and then at the end of a 2 or 3 week period, the organizations with the most votes get actual financial donations from iCivics, from one of our funders who's provided the money for us to provide those donations. So students can make that connection between their sort of online civic identity and actual civic engagement in the real world. It is no substitute for getting out there and doing the important work of helping your communities and engaging in civic life, but it just helps to make that connection, to bridge between the online world and the real world, if you will. So we have our games as apps, and I like to make this point because if they're not really mobile friendly, but they are tablet, Android or iOS device, Mac device friendly. So you can download any of these games as apps. You can play them on our site. You can play them online on a Chromebook, on a full desktop computer, but you can also download them for free on a tablet. And this is an important point because if students don't have internet access at home, they can actually play our games if you send them home with a tablet that has already had these apps downloaded on them. And so that's something that we are able to provide sort of in response to school closures and the issue of a lot of kids not having high-speed internet access at home. That's just an important point I want to make. We have a new initiative where we are trying to support English language learners. And so what that means is you could play our games in English. Branches of Power is one of our newly updated games. You can also play it in Spanish, and you can toggle back and forth at any time. You can do the same thing with our popular Do I Have a Right? You can easily switch languages and play Tengo algún derecho in Spanish language. And just another example, Immigration Nation. This is a great game for our younger learners, learning about the different pathways of legal entry to the United States. You can play this in both languages as well. The big point I want to make here is that when we have these resources for English language learners, this is the package that you can expect. There's the Spanish language play option. But I realize that not all ELLs, are native Spanish speakers. So we also provide English language voiceover, embedded glossaries, illustrated guides, scaffold tools, and then these extension packs with modifications for ELLs so that teachers have the support from us to support their ELLs no matter their native language. And if you're wondering why we haven't translated in all the languages, it's because for one game, it costs about $25,000 to translate into one other language. It's cost prohibitive, and we're not going to do it unless we can do it right. But hopefully in the future, that will be coming. One other innovation I want to share, I know my time is short, is DB Quest. This is not a game. It's a tool for helping students answer document-based questions, a really important and popular pedagogy in the American school system. So what it does, it sort of takes them by the hand and walks them step by step through a curated collection of really powerful primary sources that might have otherwise been inaccessible to them. It helps the students sort of home in on the most important points, highlight, drag, and ultimately build a response to answer the big question, which is what a DBQ is all about. So I urge you to check out DB Quest. Again, not a game, but a really powerful innovation offered to you by iCivics. Some other exciting updates I just want to quickly mention. Like I said, we have our first history game, Race to Ratify. It's a lot of fun. Thanks to the Library of Congress for funding that game. I'm sorry, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Library of Congress funded DB Quest. We have integration with single sign-on systems like Clever, like Google Classroom. We have a partnership with Nearpod. That is a proprietary paid service, but it has been free during school closures. So they have Nearpodized all iCivics lesson plans. That's a really cool tool. And as Molly mentioned, we have our AP Government course. We are constantly responding to what we're seeing happening, what's happening on the ground. Immediately after schools closed, we created a school closure toolkit to help teachers and parents keep the civic learning going while schools were closed at home. A major part of that was tying all of our games together into a game odyssey so that students can complete games, earn badges, and level up to a civic boss. The idea here being that without being in the classroom, student motivation becomes really important because there's not always a teacher there saying, are you doing your work? Are you doing your work? Are you doing your work? So the game Odyssey tries to build some motivation into that so the kids actually want to do the work, learn the games, play the games, learn what they need to learn. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you a mile a minute. As Ted McConnell mentioned earlier, iCivics leads the Civics Now Coalition. We are so lucky to have Ted as one of our senior representatives. We're so thrilled to know that Indiana is doing this work, and we want to be here to support you however we can. I just moved. I'm a native Floridian who just moved to Georgia, and I always apologize for being a carpetbagger, but then I like to say at Civics Now, we are not carpetbaggers. We are here to support you, but it is on you to bring high quality, more and better civic education to the Hoosier State. I've said it before, I'll say it one last time, and I'll end on this point. There are so many terrific programs out there. iCivics is just one of them. But the amount of resources, innovative, traditional, you name it, we have such a wealth of awesome civic education materials. But teachers can't use them if they don't have the time and space, the instructional time and space to deliver them. So that's why we need states like Indiana to advocate for and push the policy forward so that students have the instructional time throughout all grade levels to use these resources and learn to be informed and engaged participants in our democratic republic. So I thank you for your work. I applaud your efforts. And thank you again for having me and having Molly. You can reach either one of us. Our contact information is right there.
Well, thank you, Em and Molly, for that exciting presentation. I don't know about the other task force members, but I'm going to icivics.org and pick a game to play. So really, it was very stimulating. So thank you for being a part today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, and so Charles, I am going to hand the meeting over to you for a few current action items. So with that.
Thank you, Governor Crouch. So just a couple wrap-up things. First of all, wow, thank you to our panelists and presenters. It really was a lot of information. We know we wanted to pack it all in there, but a lot of the materials that they referred to will be in the Dropbox, and you can refer to those as well. But panelists, thank you. And I guess that is one of the sort of side effects, positive, of the quarantine pandemic situation, is that we get access to folks a click away. And so we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to speak with us about all of these innovations around civic education as we work forward to making some recommendations that we can pull from those. So I wanted to give the task force members and everybody just a brief update on a few things that we're working on outside of the regularly scheduled meetings, as well as some of the things we have planned for the future meetings. So first of all, as was mentioned, we have 2 more meetings scheduled, and we're hoping, fingers crossed, that those will be in-person meetings. Our tentative locations are going to be in Muncie and Bloomington. We'd like to get around outside of the Indianapolis area a little bit, even though we, virtually have sort of been all over the place. And we, regardless of the locations of the meetings, we also will make it our intention to have the video and teleconference options available for those that can't attend in person. And again, as we've said before, a recording of this and all task force meetings will be made available as well after the meeting is concluded today. We'll have a recording posted in our Dropbox materials for those that either weren't able to attend or want to review some of these presentations again. And again, also the presentation materials will also be there. So thank you to the presenters for providing that to us. So going forward, we've heard from a variety of speakers from around the nation about the overall picture of civic education, and we're going to begin now to focus on developing our specific policy recommendations and plans for how we want to move and improve civic education in Indiana. So the first two meetings were sort of gathering information about that, and we're sort of moving forward to focus on our end result and our end product of a recommendation. And as part of that, that we developed a survey to get us kind of a baseline survey of some information from our frontline teachers and school administrators about civic education. And we appreciate all of your help in first of all, developing it with members of the task force who are on that committee and getting it out to people from around the state. So that closed on Friday, and we're pleased that we had, I believe, somewhere around 550 responses from the survey. So we're going to be digesting those responses, analyzing the data, and presenting it to you at our next task force meeting in August. And I'm sure there'll be reference materials also in the Dropbox for your reference as well. In addition to that work, we're also convening the policy committee, and I appreciate all of those who are on that committee to help us work to identify some of these specific recommendations for our final report. And then our plan is to present them for discussion at the next meeting as well. So we're gonna have some ideas that we're gonna be formed at the policy committee level, bring them back to the full task force for review, discussion, and input. So we're looking forward to that. And again, I thank the members of that committee for that work that we have to do leading up to the next one. And I anticipate having a robust discussion at the task force at future meetings as we work to move towards the final report and plan, which we plan to release if all things go well. Our timeline is sort of early November, right after the election, as the General Assembly moves forward with its work, convening before our next session in January of 2021. We want to have some of these recommendations and things available for them, as well as other policymakers and other stakeholders, private and public. So that's sort of the general game plan going forward. I welcome any questions, comments. Obviously, feel free to reach out to me directly or our team here at the Indiana Bar Foundation. And I think with that, Governor Crouch, I'll turn it back over to you for any final words.
Well, thank you, Charles. And thank you, Charles and Joseph and Taylor, for making this meeting a reality. A lot of hard work went in to make this happen. And I noticed that Helen McKinney is with us, so thank you and welcome, Helen. We appreciate you participating with us today. Is there any further business to come before the task force? If not, we stand adjourned, and there will be meeting details coming to you shortly. Thank you all for your participation and your engagement in this important initiative. And with that, have a great day. Thank you.